Draw the lips. The lips are tricky to draw because I think often they're overdrawn. There aren't that many areas that make up the actual lips. So let's go over that first. First we have the crease, or the opening. This crease is really what is showing the expression. Whether you're happy, sad, I don't know, angry. That crease is really what is the main part of the lips. Then when we go into the actual upper lip and bottom lip, underneath the skin, there are three major pockets of fat, if you will. We have one pocket of fat on the upper part of the lip, and then the lower lip is divided into two different pockets. So sometimes for people that have really large bottom lips, you'll see that there's almost like a crack or a line here. A good example is Angelina Jolie. If you look at pictures of her, she has like a slit in the middle of her lips, and that's just the divide between the two lower pockets of fat. There will often be some sort of shadow underneath the bottom lip, where it's going into the chin. I'm going to call it chin division. And then up here, we have the Cupid's bow, a lip valve. Lip valve and Cupid's bow. So how do we go about drawing the lips? Let's start by what not to do. What you don't want to do when you're drawing the lips is just start with the outline. We don't want to give anyone intense lip liner. This will always look, not check. This will always look cartoony every time. Instead, what you want to do is first start with the actual crease. So if I were drawing these lips, I'm going to look starting here, marking in the shape, noticing where it dips here for that first pocket of fat, coming down, and then it comes up. Just like with all of the features, don't just assume that you know what they look like. Really look for what is happening in the shape. The more accurate, the more likely you are to capture who you're drawing. Then, to mark the upper and bottom lip, I don't draw the outline. Instead, all I do is mark the Cupid's bow very lightly, and I'll mark the height of the bottom lip. So kind of looking at what that is and marking it like that. That is all I will draw. Everything else will be left up to shading. Typically, if the light is just hitting someone's face straight on or sort of in a more ordinary fashion, usually the bottom lip is in more shadow. Usually the top lip is in more shadow than the bottom lip. The bottom lip tends to capture the light here, where the bottom lip is facing down and is in shadow. So I'm going to start by really lightly shading the upper lip. Up in here. Noticing that the shading goes a bit beyond the crease. And going into the other side. And as with all features of the face, no one is going to be perfectly symmetrical. So make sure that you're treating each side differently. I'm going to go ahead and darken where it's a little closer to the crease. Okay. And around this pocket of fat, we're going to shade it as if it were a sphere. So meaning that the bottom is going to be more in shadow, but the top is going to be filled with light. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and start shading the bottom lip. Again, noticing that there are two pockets of fat here that look kind of like teardrops. So I'm going to shade with the center part being the highlight and the shadows being around those shapes. So I'm going to start from the corner, going down the crease line. And I'm using a 6B pencil here, but you could just as easily use a 2B or a 4B as long as you're pressing really light. Okay. Now before you go too crazy into shading the bottom lip, notice what the actual value is here. There isn't really a difference between her skin tone and the bottom lip right here. So I'm not just going to assume that there's this dark value there just because it's an end. Instead, I want to really look at the picture I'm drawing and follow what I see, not what I think that I see. Okay. I'm also going to shade a little bit to the outside of the lips to add in a skin tone. And I'm leaving a little white highlight around the lips. Usually there's a little rim of light around our features. Okay. So we can't see her Cupid's bow here too much, but what you're going to do is leave that outline again. Really lightly I'm going to mark it in, and I'm going to shade what also looks like a teardrop shape, something like that. Less is definitely more when you're shading the lips. I would rather you go under than over. Okay. So now at this point I can just add some details and some texture. So our lips tend to have vertical lines kind of going up and down, and when you're really chapped you can see those lines. So at this time you can add those if you like. Again, really barely pressing down. Just adding a tiny bit of detail here. Okay. Now this process would be the same even if you were drawing that someone that had slightly thinner lips. So you would still begin with the crease, and then you would mark the boundary of the upper lip and the bottom lip, and you would shade. For here, since her lips aren't as big, you have a little bit less of the sort of sphere shading with the highlight and shadow. Instead, you have mostly shading, and a lot of the other subtlety that's happening is more around the lips. So if I were shading these lips, I'd be working a lot with the values that are around her mouth more than the values that are actually in her lip. So it really just depends on who you're drawing. So here's a quick overview of the parts of the lips. We have the crease, we have the upper ball of fat, we have the two pads of fat on the bottom, the Cupid's bow, and the lip valve here. Remember that the crease is what defines the expression, and that's what you want to draw first. Then you want to be thinking about what the pads of fat on the lips that you're drawing look like, identify those, and then start subtly shading, really looking where the light is. Avoiding outlines at all times. Draw really lightly.